So you remember flying on the back of an eagle near death after standing on top of a tower, facing the greatest of Sauron's minions, the Witch King of Angmar. You fought him under thunder and lightning, and you were saved at the last minute by Olorin, or Mithrandir, or Gandalf. And you three, Beregond, Cynric, and Faroth, you were able to escape. You brought Cirion with you, but you discovered on your way home that Cirion wasn't going to make it. And you made your way back to Annuminas, and you landed at the very, very top of the Tower of Elendil, where you were greeted by lots of people very, very quickly, and that's where we pick up today. So you've literally just landed, and there are people all around, guards looking frightened at the size of the eagle that has landed in their courtyard next to the statue of Elendil and the huge fountain there. As Gwaihir flaps his wings, all the water from the fountain splashes up and lands with a... And you can get off the back of the Lord of Eagles, and people will approach you. What? How? What? Where is... What happened?
As I slide off, the last one to get on, the lifeless form of Cirion slides off the eagle and into my arms, and I'm left carrying the single reason that I am still standing today. He looks pale, his eyes dark. I don't reply to anyone coming. I just stand there.
The guards are like calling for help, and like healers and people to come and help. And there's like a big sort of commotion at the top of this courtyard.
It's too late for healers, calls out Beregond. Show us to the halls of your halls of the dead.
The words, it's too late for healers, each syllable of that sentence is like a knife in Faroth's chest. His throat is dry, and he can't speak. He looks down at the lifeless form of Cirion, and he looks around wildly, as if hoping by some strange miracle that Nark had been brought with them also. But they have lost one of their friends. Both of their friends. And he looks around and also doesn't say anything. His gaze, not seeing anyone in front of him asking these questions.
So these guards are kind of crowding all around you, and they're kind of like barking questions and trying to get an answer from you, but you're too kind of shell-shocked to understand. And then you can hear this voice, enough, enough. You can see Arahad of Cardolan, who is one of the contenders for the kingship, I guess you could call him. And he's kind of like pushing people aside, and he's trying to get everyone to calm down. He walks to the front. Faroth. Oh, I agree with you. We'll see to your friend. You need to rest. We can discuss whatever happened later.
And these words are just distant, as if coming from another place. And Faroth just walks past him and just starts moving away from the crowd.
So most of the guys will like move out of your way. Some of them don't, but you just like shoulder bash into them sort of slowly, moving through the crowd. And there's like all this sort of like chaos and people talking, and you can see like a stretcher brought out, and they begin to carry Cirion's body, if you'll let them take it away.
Even with his arms burning from holding onto the back of an eagle for hour, 2 hours, he doesn't let them. He walks in whichever direction is offered.
Beregond comes up, takes the stretcher off one of them, and passes one end, puts it up behind, under the fallen Cirion, handing one end to you, and I'll take the other end.
Cynric will let you bear You have equal reason to bear his friend, but these people do not.
I agree. And again, I turn to any face around and say, in Minas Tirith, there is the Rath Dinan, the silent street, between the pale domes and empty halls and images of men long dead. It is where we lay our dead. Do you have a similar place here? Or is it like in the days of old before we built these mausoleums, and you bury them under a mound of earth covered by the white flowers of the Alfirin?
We have such a place. If you follow me, I'll bring you.
I call out after Faroth. We are taking Syrian to the halls of the dead.
And Faroth pauses in his step, and it's almost like he doesn't want to look back. He doesn't want to meet his the eye contact of his friends. But almost automatically, he sort of stops and turns around, and you can see in his eyes he's devastated, and he can't fully form his words or emotions right now. So wordlessly, he stops and he sort of walks back round to where Beregond is, and he just nods.
So the men will lead you through the Tower of Elendil, which you are in, and down into the city itself. And there is a sort of quiet street, covered over mostly, a sort of shelter between the two rows of houses to stop the rain from getting in. And there is a total silence here. Even the guards, when they're kind of speaking quietly to each other as they're approaching, but then they reach this street and they stop entirely, and they lead you to one of these houses. They open the door and it's like this big open sort of room, and there are stone slabs. There's this sort of bluish tint to the whole place, sort of a twilight or maybe a dawn sort of look to it, and you can place the body on one of these stone slabs. There's absolute silence. There are two robed men who are kind of like standing. They're looking at two other bodies, kind of dressing them. One of them is like putting up buttons on one of these dead bodies and the fine clothes they're putting on him, and they look in your direction and approach. One of them puts his hand on your shoulder, Cynric, and gives it a squeeze. He doesn't say anything, but he just gives your shoulder a squeeze and like gestures towards the stone tablet.
With Beregond on the other end, I guess we lift and place our friend respectfully as we can upon the stone slab. Maybe this is the first time they've got a real look at the injuries that Syrian sustained, the grievousness of his wounds. I mean, some of them saw the strike, or all of them remember it in their own way, as the sword ploughed through him and into the top of the tower. But Syrian, like, pale and still, Cynric has tended to focus on his face and can barely bring the words. You will clean him, won't you?
He nods.
He takes a deep breath, jaw tightened, locked in position, and makes for the exit, not with haste, but with a struggle. Struggle within himself, not with anyone else. But
the other roadman does the same thing to you, Beregond. He like puts a hand on your shoulder and gives it a squeeze, and he has this look in his face of empathy, like he understands, like he has seen this and your reaction 1,000 times.
Baragon sort of shrugs his hand off a little bit, and then feeling a big, not having a slight memory of, having a slight memory or a slight consciousness that this man means him no harm, just smiles at him mechanically, not a big smile, but just a token kind of nod, and doesn't look at, gets distracted by other dead bodies around here.
There are two, yeah. Dunedain.
Yeah. He's slightly doesn't want to can't look at his fallen friend, and has a look at the two dead Dunedain, and strokes one of their, just sort of pushes one of their hair back off his forehead for a second, just have a look at him, and then turns and walks out.
And Faroth is just left there looking down at Syrian, peaceful, looking cold, the lips already starting to have its color fade. And he just presses his hand onto his shoulder and tries to say something to one of the people that will be tending him and can't. So instead, slowly follows Beragond without saying a word.
So you make your way back into the Street of Silence and back towards the tower. You have quarters here. You were given them before. And the people that you meet along the way, they'll all kind of say, you need your rest, as if it's like a mantra, as if they don't know what else you can say in a situation like this. You need to get some rest. If you want to do that or not is up to you. But the tower is open to you. If you wanted to go and find Arahad maybe, or if you wanted to go and try and get some sleep or even some food, it's up to you.
Yeah, I think Faroth, once they're out from this place where all the dead are laid, he's still walking behind Beragond, and as he's walking, it's almost like the adrenaline is slowly starting to wear off, and he goes, ah! And he clutches at his shoulder. There is a shallow wound from the battle that occurred before, and there's something inside it. And he tries his best to grab hold of it, whatever this thing is. And after a second, pulls it out, and he looks. And it is a shard of Nars Matok, the weapon that was exploded by the power of the Witch King. The battle, the adrenaline had meant that Faroth hadn't even realized that he had taken this very superficial wound. And he looks at this almost like miniature dagger-sized piece of the weapon that his friend had borne since he'd known him, and he closes his fist around it.
As you're kind of walking through the castle, you can see that the various people that you would have recognized from the King's Moot are kind of like walking around, and there's some people talking in a hushed corner, and you can see your father over in a corner speaking with Arahad, Farath. And they're speaking kind of quietly, and they look in your direction for a moment, and he approaches. My son, you've returned.
I have.
And what is the manner of your return? Success?
Farath looks back to his friends. Would they have stopped or would they have carried on? I just need to know if they're going to be with me or not.
Around the vicinity, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
Farroth. Yeah. Farroth sort of looks to his feet, and he can feel the bite of this metallic shard in his grip as his fist clenches at his father's words. And he says, I failed.
I suppose that's to be expected.
Farroth looks down, and all of that adrenaline, though it's wearing off, he can feel this hot feeling sort of spreading from his stomach up the back of his neck and behind his eyes. And he gives his father a look of utter hatred at this second. And it would not take any check to realize that Farroth is taking every ounce of himself to stop himself from hurling himself at this man, his supposed father.
We are to meet upstairs in the war room. Arahad, myself, you and yours, and some others. Don't be late.
Wordlessly, Farroth turns his back on his father and walks away. More out of just wanting to be away from people so that he wouldn't lash out at this individual.
So what do you guys want to do?
Imagine. So I make the walk, whether alone or not, back to where Guahir rested Ciaro down. I don't know if he perhaps meets her at some point, already having descended along most of the path. And I think he spends some time alone in whatever this ruined city has for a garden or open space.
Yeah, so where Guahir had landed, at the top of the Tower of Elendil. Now, Annuminas was once the capital of Arnor, and some say it's the grandest tower in all of the kingdoms of men. Some say Minas Ithil was finer, but it's enormous. And about halfway up this tower, there's a huge sort of platform, garden, fountain with canals that run down the length of the city. And so there's greenery up there and some trees and stuff like that. So they would have left Ciaro there to kind of graze and try and relax.
And he kind of crosses whatever garden space past statuary and carved benches and running water, and he sits at the nearest bench to where Ciaro is, grazing. And just a hand reaches out to the flank and pushes its fingers into the fur. And he just sits looking over, somewhat as in reflection to what the Witch King was doing on his throne. He is looking out over the lands of Arnor.
So you can see from this tower that you're on, the two towers of Fornos in the distance, and you can see the thunder swirling above there.
He sits in quiet, feeling emotion, the fingers stroking through the fur, and he just ruminates on the storm, on what comes next.
So perhaps an hour would pass with each of you taking some time to breathe and to try and process what's happening before runners would find you.
Beregond would have gone up to the meeting place, and he'd have just rested there. The room they indicated.
So this room is where they keep the treasures of old Arnor. And when you walk in, there's this big table, and it's covered with maps and documents and things like that. And there are all these like kind of tattered banners, sort of black with the star of Elendil hanging from the various walls. The windows look out. This is way, way near the top of the tower. You can see for miles around. And there is in one corner a suit of plate mail from the Old Kingdom. This beautiful sort of carved plate with this star emblem over the chest and a winged helmet. And yeah, there are like chairs and various comfortable places to sit, as well as like a small sort of kitchen for refreshments and things. This is a place obviously where people discuss important things, and notably they discuss war here.
Almost mechanically, just following instinct and habit, Beregond goes over to the suit of plate mail and is just inspecting all the insignia, the metal work, just going over it and sort of drawing copies of the engravings and things on it, and just he may not be feeling anything, but he's got a deeply ingrained habit of examining and inspecting ancient craftsmanship, and this will occupy the sort of active bit of his brain, if not the rest of him.
Yeah, so you're like looking at this suit of armor, almost silvery in its finish. As I say, lots of star emblems all over, the symbol of Arnor and Elendil. The kind of thing you might expect a fountain guard to wear in Gondor, although finer even than that. The helmet looks decorative. It's got these wings, which would be very impractical, but definitely the kind of thing that a commander or a general might wear. And it's very impressive to look upon.
Would I, in my lore and my snippets of information that I know about this, that, and everything, be able to place what this is or whose it is, or is it not famous enough for that?
Yeah, I think that you would.
I mean, I can make up some story, but
I think you would piece together that it was the king's, so it would have been Elendil's at one time, and it would have passed down through the line of kings until there were no more kings, and so it's lain here dormant for centuries at this stage. And so the runners would find Faroth and Cynric, and they would say that your presence is requested in the war room, if you would make your way up there. Beregond, you would, as you're kind of standing there, you would see people begin to file into the room, various Dunedain, one at a time, making their way in. People you might recognize, Arahad is among them, Fardred, Faroth's father, is among them. Deerheil, who is the boy from Rudar.
Yep.
Yep. Who ostensibly is next in line, but is a boy. And so all these kind of like big wigs and important people would kind of file their way in. But you would notice, probably to your surprise, that among them is an elf that you recognize, a female elf, Laniel, who you had met in Mirkwood. You remember that she was a sort of captain of the guard there, and that she had worked for Thranduil as a sort of bodyguard, and then she had spoken with Faroth a lot. And next to her is a Bjorning, very, very tall, unexpected this far west, certainly. So they would walk in together with another elf who you don't recognize, and they would kind of like move the way towards the table. Laniel would be speaking quietly to the two of them. And then I think Cynric and Faroth would arrive as well.
I'd find my seat somewhere near Beregond.
So as you kind of take a seat, there is a bit of a hubbub and a sort of like whispered conversation. And Arahad would stand up and he would say, "Friends, we grieve with you. You must tell us what transpired. It is clear that Nar did not make it back with you, and I am certain that there's nothing that our healers can do for Syrian. But what transpired?"
Despite everything, despite the crushing feelings of guilt, there's no other way to describe it. Despite this, Faroth is the one that stands. It's his responsibility. These are his people. And he looks and he surveys the collective of people before them. And he says, "It was my design to lead my companions to Fornost. I believed we could bring about some alliance between those who have fallen in Arnor's history. I was wrong."
"A foolish errand to go into lost Fornost. The price that you paid is a mercy compared to what could have transpired," says Fardred.
"You're right," Faroth says, and you can see behind his eyes anger burning. "You're absolutely right. We went to Fornost so we could liberate those of our people who reside in Gundabad, so we could be united and our people could go forth. But now that I come to think of it, Father, I'm beginning to question whether that goal was worth the lives of two of my best friends."
He doesn't say anything, just stares at you. And Arahad says, "How did they fall? What happened?"
The enemy of old, the Witch King of Angmar, has returned. And in Fornost, in fallen Fornost, his black gaze stares unceasingly out of the tower of Minas Mened over the spans and the leagues to here, to Annuminas, plotting your fall. The powers of Sauron are moving and will strike against you sooner or later. We did not expect to see the lieutenant of our enemy there, and that is what brought us down. The plan was not as foolish. The plan was not as foolish as we thought, but bad luck. Bad luck caused one of the most powerful enemies in all Middle-earth to be in our path.
The Witch King. Yeah. The Witch King yet lives?
"He neither lives or is dead. He could not be defeated."
"Indeed, the Lord of Angmar is deathless and lifeless, stuck in between for all time until his master crumbles to dust." And Thranduil enters the room, the king of Mirkwood. He's got this goblet of wine in his perfect hand. He has a crown of red leaves and this red and orange cloak that sweeps behind him. "And what happened to Olorin? Where is Mithrandir?"
Faroth tries to swallow, but his throat is dry, and he half mutters, half chokes. You fell.
So Thranduil's perfect visage, which is almost always a neutral face, one of power and control, falls for a second, and you can see these hints of scars that you never usually see on his face. His like brow furrows, and he shakes his head. He fell.
Cynric, at this point, like when the words fell echo around the chamber, his shoulders fall, his head falls down, and there is an audible but quiet, weak whisper, "I could not save him."
Could not save him. Olorin. Mithrandir. You do not have his body? Where is the ring of fire?
And as he says that, Faroth, it dawns on him, obviously, the magnitude and the horror that Gandalf has passed, but also having not realized that Gandalf bore such a significant item of power. He looks at him horrified, and then he tries his best to continue by saying, Gandalf, he died to save us. His sacrifice bought us the moments that we needed to escape.
There's kind of a hint of a smile on Thranduil's face, and he says, so like him. When he first came to Middle-earth, he seemed the least of the Astari, smaller, more ragged, less impressive, certainly, than Sauron. But there was something that the shipwright saw in Mithrandir, and he gave him his ring. There were 3 rings made for elves. Only 3. And one of them was given to Gandalf as a gift. And now that gift, that powerful ring, the Ring of Fire, Nenya, is lost. Lost to the Witch King. Is that what I am to understand?
Faroth feels those piercing eyes. It was always difficult to look at Thranduil in the eye anyway. But now it's just impossible. And Varoth just manages a nod, one curt nod.
Cynric, like, he feels some fealty to Thranduil, like, raises his gaze to Thranduil. He fell from the tower. We did not see him fall to the Witch King. Perhaps there is still hope?
If there is a single being on Middle-earth that I would dare hope survive such a catastrophe, it would be him. He takes a sip of his wine. Arahad clears his throat, sort of uncomfortable. There will be a ceremony to say goodbye to the fallen this evening. If you would like to speak for your fallen comrades, we would appreciate it. We also found these effects in your companion's room, marked with a note. And so he gestures, and there's a stout dwarven chest in the corner of the room. And the note says, in the certain event of my demise, give the coin to Beregond, the helm to Cynric, the tome to Sirion, and the seal and the letter to Faroth. And so he points towards the chest. Your companion, Nar, he kind of grins at it, was certain of his own doom. And he left you something.
The words Nar was certain of his own doom brings a hollow horror to Faroth. He had recognized a statement of that like uttered from Nar before, but he'd never believed it. And he looks at the chest with confusion and further weight adding to his shoulders, knowing that this had been planned for.
Arahad speaks again. He says, I understand that these are difficult times for you and your companions, and we don't want to crowd you. We will have to discuss soon what is to be done. We'll have the ceremony this evening. Until then, we will leave you to grieve. And in the morning, we will discuss what plans we have and how we hope to fight. And he kind of like bows his head to Thranduil. And he stands, and as does your father and a bunch of the other Dunedain begin to leave. Thranduil says, I have brought with me reliable men whom I thought may help you. This is not a replacement. Do not think me so base as to replace your boon companions. I had left Mirkwood before I heard of their fall. Nonetheless, these are talented people. This is Bord, son of Berengar. He's a reliable warrior, but more than that, he's an emissary, and you will need his skills on the path ahead. The other is a Wilderman, but he has been waylaid on our path here. He will join us in a few days.
You see the bearded man nod. Perhaps this is the first time that he's been clean in quite some time, and you see that his face is the only presentable part of his head. Everything else is matted and kind of gross. He doesn't belong here. But staring at you, he realizes that that he had almost forgotten the grief east of the Misty Mountains. Not the grief of the farmer of Bree without enough coin for an ale, but the grief of someone who has lost something. He nods and looks almost surprised at Thranduil's compliment. He betrays that single feature and then kind of takes a step closer.
As that step closer is made, Faroth takes a step back. And his eyes meets this stranger. And there'd been a flash of anger as Thranduil had even suggested replacing the two friends, although he made it obviously very clear that these people aren't replacing them, but Faroth doesn't see it that way. And he says, this is not a road that must be taken by anyone else. It would be folly for more of us to join.
Can I counsel you, Faroth?
Faroth doesn't move. It seems like he's acknowledging you, but yeah.
The mission of the Heralds does not end with the fall of Nar and the fall of Syrian. And the mission of the Heralds is to recruit free peoples of the West in our battle against the darkness. If these people come to volunteer, they may not look like much, he says, but if Thranduil values them. Maybe it would be an idea worth our while to have him tag along and see if he can see what help he can offer.
Farroth looks at Beragond, and Beragond, you can just see a wave of sadness across Farroth. And he says, I mean no disrespect, Beragond. But I think the time is long past for us to acknowledge the fact that our councils together have not borne. And he can't really finish the sentence, and he looks across at this stranger once again, and he says, do as you will, but following us is folly. And Farroth moves over to that chest and sort of, maybe it's a bit too, how big's the chest, sorry, Lloyd, because like he might not be able to carry it by himself, but he's just going to try and drag this chest out of the room with him as he's going to go.
Yeah, so it's actually not huge. It's something that Nara would have carried with him, as he's traveling. It's probably, the size of a briefcase, maybe something like that. Maybe a little bit bigger than that, but it's not huge.
Can Board kind of interrupt you while you're doing that?
Yeah, totally. He's starting to pick it up.
He speaks up and he says, do you know my name?
And Farroth stops and he finds himself sort of caught off guard, and there's also almost the hot flush of embarrassment of realizing suddenly you've been quite rude, but he acknowledges it briefly and he just shakes his head. No, he doesn't know your name.
Grimnir thinks back when his brother, Board thinks back when his brother Grimnir told him about these people long ago. And it always seemed so strange and poetic and almost too coincidental that Board would become so entangled with them after. Their numbers are fewer, no doubt. But he looks to Farroth, you, and he says, I don't imagine you do, but I know your name. And that hangs on the air for a long moment. And he ponders, continuing. He begins to speak up. I don't know who your friends were, but my fight is not alongside of you as much as this. And he looks to Thranduil, bowing his head in a way that's just a sign of respect, that almost out of habit. He looks back to you, Farroth, and he says, but if your fight is with the darkness too, then let the eye of the enemy feast on me.
Farroth looks at this man and then he looks to the ground, almost ashamed. He looks back at him and he says, you may know my name, but after this day, I fear it shall not carry the weight that it once did. This is Beragond of Minas Ithil. And this is Cynric, the Horse Lord of Rohan.
A slight one-eyed man looks at you and nods. He's probably young, but he looks like he's aged quickly. And he's not looking his best.
And Board gives a deep bow and says, I've seen men of your kind east of the mountains.
Many leagues the men of Gondor travel. And we always thought, pressed hard against Mordor, that we were bearing the brunt of it, but it seems that the evil of Sauron is found in all places. I remember your brother, and I can see the look of him on your face. And
Board scowls.
And actually, as you scowl, the little Gondor man takes a step back and then pretends he wasn't slightly intimidated and goes to and goes over to the window and just looks out, embarrassed of being slightly caught off guard.
Rick stands, a larger man, not so slight, a warrior through and through, though he probably does not reach your height. He moves closer and speaks at a lower tone, not to say the others cannot hear. We have taken losses. They are fresh. Perhaps you can forgive my friends, but I know both of them will come to respect you and what you can do for the all of Middle-earth upon our journey. The fight against the darkness is not one we can do alone, and I, for one, will not refuse your help. And he holds out his hand for one of those kind of forearm shoulder shakes and looks you in the eye with eyes that have seen a great many things, including face to face with the evil eye you speak of.
All up and down the Anduin, yet still Bord has not seen or run into many horse lords of Rohan. But he grasps your forearm because he knows the name Cineric. And he looks in your eyes and he says, "My brother took a shine to you." He says, "I'm not sure why." Looking you up and down, almost like a joke, maybe. But he says, "Thank you for your welcome, and I am sorry for your losses." And he looks you in the eyes, and you know he means it. Hopefully.
Cynric nods. You get the feeling that he does. Does not mince words. He says what he means, and he feels the same from you. He backs off away from the shake and gives Thranduil a similarly respectful nod that you will notice as thanks. They needed a light in a dark place, or lights, and it could not have come at a better time.
Beregond approaches again, looking a little hesitant, and says, Cineric, Cineric, as so often, reminds me of the simplicity of the men of old in the First Age, when they forged the bonds of friendship that created our people with an honesty and an openness that we could do well to ape. He says, "Forgive me my standoffishness," and he offers his hand.
Bord takes his hand in return and says, "There's nothing to forgive." And he sees your sentiments on your face and says, "The shadow faces us all, and it's cunning and patient. But when it comes gnawing, hacking, breaking, biting, and burning. and we will face it together. As he grasps the haft of his axe.
As Bud says, the shadow comes for us all. Almost involuntary, there's a little glance from Beregond in the direction of Faroth, but then he turns back to Bud instantly. But there's the sharp-sighted might have caught that.
Faroth watches the scene, and he feels a little ashamed at his behavior, but he isn't someone who's going to atone for it at this point. His mind is on other things, and he says, "We have preparations to make," and he leaves the room.
So what's in the chest? What's in the chest?
So Beregond, you can move over to the chest and managing to. Oh, sorry, did you take it or?
Oh, I was taking it. Sorry, I thought it was addressed to me. If it wasn't, then I won't take it. Then
You have a letter.
Yeah, it's so the chest contains the things for everyone.
I see. In that case, I won't take it then, and I won't leave the room. In that case, I will stay. I will just, in that case, retcon. I will have taken the note, but I don't open it, and I let Beregond move forward to open the chest in that case. Apologies.
You can open this finely made dwarven chest. You assume that Nar made it himself. He was a bit of a craftsman. He made a lot of things. And there's immediately a gleam of gold that would catch your eye, Beregond. You have a trained eye for finding it, and this is fine gold indeed. And you can see that kind of attached to it by a little bit of string is a small note for Beregond.
So yeah, Beregond takes it, and are there any other notes in there?
There are. So the note for you is attached to a thick golden coin. Also in here you can see that there is a book with a note for Syrian. Obviously Nar didn't know that Syrian wouldn't make it back. A note attached to a sort of scroll case, which is addressed to Faroth, and then a small note attached to the largest item by far, which looks to be a helmet for a horse, which is obviously addressed to Cynric. So
as then because he likes handing out presents, Beregond just hands them to each person, sort of inspecting them as much as he can whilst he's handing them over before he actually surrenders them. And then he'll take his own coin and see what it is.
So inspecting it, you can see that there is a stamp, incredibly intricate stamp of the Lonely Mountain. And the note says, "For your love of stories, a storied coin from the hoard of a dragon."
He looks at this coin, and the light shining from it just glints in his eye, and there's this sort of deep glint of gold in his eye as he looks at the hoard, the coin from the hoard of a dragon. And there's he's slightly underlit with the reflection of the gold.
The helmet.
And he says, "Can I just add one thing?" And he says, "What a precious thing."
Yes. It's a strange coin. It's very large. Firstly, much larger than a normal sort of golden coin you would have. Maybe it's ceremonial or ornamental. And as I say, it's got like the crest of Erebor pressed into one side, and the other the face of King Thror, king under the mountain. And it seems to glow. I mean, it's, maybe it's the light just catching off the coin, but whenever you look down at it, you can see, all of you, the reflection of the gold in Beregond's face. the helmet for the horse, it's this sort of like angular sort of covering for a horse's head, inscribed with runes. And the note says, Ciara was always my favorite. May this keep her safe.
Tineric holds the pieces, the piece after he gets it from Baragon's greedy hands as they trace through all the runes upon it, I'm sure. And he holds it, facing it, like he has often done, putting his forehead against the bridge of Ciara's snout. He, as if she was there in the room. And his jaw clenches again, reading the last words of his friend.
There's a book written in Kurzad, which is the language of the dwarves. This thick, sort of leather-bound tome. Now, I don't know if any of you can read Dwarven, but it was meant for Syrian. And it says, may this satisfy your endless thirst for knowledge, even for a day. It's obviously some sort of Dwarven tome of knowledge of some kind. And the scroll case, you can open it up and you can see inside a letter written in this immaculate dwarven hand. How Nora would never have shown this side of him, I don't think, but he had a craftsman's perfection sort of in everything that he attempted. And he had this beautiful letter written in Kurzad as well. And a wax seal at the bottom, and also included is a ring with it's a signet ring, a sort of something you would press into wax, obviously Nars. And the note says, more valuable to you than coins or steel is a proper introduction.
Uh-huh.
Faroth looks at it, and he takes the letter, and he sort of, as he's reading it, he sort of just presses his head to it like that in his hand, and then looks at it once again, reading it a second time, savoring those words. And then he takes up the ring. And what's the symbol in the signet ring, Lloyd? Is there like a particular design?
Yeah, so it's a sort of mix of silver and gold, quite a nice sort of spiral, two pieces of metal interwoven. And at the top there's a signet of a boar's head. That was Nara's particular sigil, I guess you would call it, from his clan.
Yeah, in fact, I think Faroth might recognize that symbol then from it adorning his dwarven plate, perhaps. And mirroring Cynric, there is a definite clenching of a jaw, a deep sniff as Faroth places the ring upon his finger and sort of looks sort of shiny-eyed at his friends.
So you look at these various things that Nar has left you, thoughtful gifts, possibly the last thing that will tie you to him. And you're allowed to rest and to kind of chat and to spend some time thinking about your fallen companions. We're just going to take a super quick break there because I really need to go to the little girls' room. We'll be back in 2 minutes.
Yep.
All right.
Sounds good.
Right, I am back.
Could you copy all of the notes out so I can paste them into the notes?
Oh, yes. Yep, I'll do that now. Whew, it's hard going, isn't it? Oh my goodness.
Oh
Just a
my
little.
god. Like it's emulating real life in the sense that, you know, you always think that there is something that you should say, or there is something that you would have ready, but yeah, like it's heavy, man. Like I feel I have this sort of weight on me this session. It's really rough, man.
Good.
Diddle-a-doo. I have little things I could say, but here and there, but I feel I'm already doing that too much, so I'm just leaving the silence to sit heavy as its own effect.
Yeah, I think it works.
Well, I'm sure we'll have a chance to each say something at some point. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
we've got it ready. So, it feels weird them not being here as well. Like like it's like the absence is definitely felt.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of unfortunate, obviously, that they're not here, but also it kind of works on like another level that they're not here because they can't even, you can't even flashback with them, or like you can't get their thoughts, which is what would happen.
It's feeling empty.
Yeah.
It's like they've been asked to leave the table.
Yeah.
After a death. If they're Gary to leave the rest to fend for themselves.
So I like how White Shores in a far green country is affixed directly next to the Eye of Sauron.
Yeah. I felt really harsh with you there, Barker, because obviously I love that you're in this game now, but my character doesn't.
Are you kidding me? Of course you shouldn't. There would have been nothing worse than you being like, "Welcome to the party. I'm going to put my grief aside so we can form this fellowship and move on."
No, I know you know that, man. Like, I'm just saying, like, for me personally, like, I like to think I'm quite a polite person anyway. So, like, even when role playing, it hurts when I'm being rude.
Well, I'll shatter that illusion for you now, Rob. You're not as nice as you think you are.
That is true. I will have to look into my.
I had a feeling the other two would reject you, so I went last and thought I would welcome you, or at least give you that thread not to walk out the door.
You're like, oh, well, I'll go then.
It's very generic as well, I think, to kind of like think like practically as well, and like keep the big picture in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And he's lost enough before, so it's not quite as new to him as the others potentially.
So why aren't you so special? Sorry, go on. Okay.
Night falls. You spent the bulk of the day maybe in that room, kind of probably mostly in silence, but occasionally maybe remembering something about Syrian or Nar. You're at this great platform that stretches up out of Mindon Elendil, which is the great spire of Annuminas. It's built by the hands of the Numenorians, and as I said, there are few towers in Middle-earth like it. Now, the people of Minas Ithil will always say that their tower is more grand, and the people of Minas Tirith will say that theirs is more grand. But you've maybe seen a couple of those, and this one definitely competes. From this tower's fountain, a canal runs down the length of the city towards Lake Evendim. And on that canal, moored to the platform next to it, are 3 boats. They're in front of a statue of Elendil and the beautiful fountain that runs into the canal. And laid out on a pyre on one of these boats is Syrian. He's been dressed in finery, and his hoard of Gondor is proudly displayed between his hands. On his right is another pyre boat. This one is empty, save for the few sparse belongings atop it in a dwarven chest. This is all that remains of Nar. And on the left of that, another. This one is empty, bar a single long wooden pipe. That is all that remains of Olorin, of Mithrandir, of Gandalf the Grey. And Thranduil walks among these boats effortlessly. His hand grazes delicately over the pipe of Gandalf. He gently touches the hand of Cirion and lingers for a moment on the pyre of Nar. All of the Dunedain are assembled, or as many as could fit on this platform, as well as Thranduil, Laniel, and some of the elves that they had brought with them. And he says, of Cirion of Minas Ithil and Nar of Erebor, I can say little. They came to my hall and proved themselves to be loyal and kind. Nar, most of all, surprised me. My people and his have a checkered past, but he overcame that. He was a good dwarf and a friend to elves. There are not many that I can say that about. And of Mithrandir, there are no words to describe my sadness at his passing. Wise beyond most in Middle-earth and kind to a fault, he has watched over this world ceaselessly for millennia. This world is poorer for his absence. We will never forget the Grey Pilgrim. He takes a breath. And there's like this silence, just like the fluttering of the wind, a couple of banners and torches. And he sings. Man kenin ye ekayana maneni mai wialtar artaier isila morta kiryaran yulue romena kuva vehiela Telpina ikala nemise man kelin ye kaiana numena.
And as he sings, Beregond takes a branch of one of the pines of this area, because he doesn't have one of the evergreen Oilari trees that grew on Numenor of old, but that they used to place on the prows of the departing ships of the dead as they sent them out to sea. But he takes the nearest substitute and lays one on each on the boats to carry the dead.
And you can see running down the cheek of Thranduil is a tear, which is not something you would expect of an elf. And he composes himself and turns away from Gandalf's pyre, last of all, a lingering look, before he walks back to where you are standing.
Faroth looks down the aligned of the assembled. There's this hollow feeling in his stomach. They say that a lot of these ceremonies is to obviously pay homage to the dead and to give them their due and to bask in the light of their honor and the deeds that they had done throughout this land. But also, It's there to make it real. It's there for you to understand that the world has changed. And Farath feels this change hit him like a tidal wave. And as if begging, pleading, he looks down the line to see who is going to step up to speak, because it isn't going to be him just yet, because he can't quite hack it.
Through Rohan, over fen and field, where the long grass grows, the west wind comes walking, and about the walls it goes. What news from the west, O wandering wind, do you bring me tonight? Have you seen Syrian the fair, by moon or by starlight? I saw him ride o'er 7 streams, over waters wide and grey. I saw him walk in empty lands until he passed away, into the shadows of the north, lost to the eyes of man. The north wind may have heard the horn of the son of Eridan. O Syrian, from the high walls westward I looked afar, but you came not from the empty lands, there where no men are. From the mouths of the sea the north wind flies, and the sand hills and the stones. The wailing of the gulls it bears, and at the gate it moans. What news from the north, O sighing wind, do you bring me at eve? Where now is Syrian the fair? He tarries, and I grieve. Ask not of me where he doth dwell, so many bones there lie, on the white stones and the dark stones under the stormy sky. So many fallen to Fornost's fields before the reaching tower. Ask of the north wind news of them. The north wind mourns their hour. O Syrian, beyond that gate the Gondor road runs south, but you come not, and wailing gulls but haunt the ruin's mouth. From the gate of kings the north wind rides, and past the echoed halls, and clear and cold about the tower its crystal clarion calls. What news of the north, O mighty wind, do you bring me today? What news of Syrian the bold, for he is long away? Top Minas Menel I heard his cry, a deadly foe he fought. His cloven horn, his shattered spear, they to the earth were brought. His head so proud, his face so fair, his limbs they laid to rest, and Fornost, golden Fornost walls, bore him upon its breast. O Syrian, the tower of God shall ever northward gaze.
You see a great many of the Dunedain kind of like nodding. Quite a few teary eyes as they watch and listen.
And then for Nah, he just sings a little, the only verse he knows. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find our long forgotten gold.
Beautiful. You have 50 million inspiration, Caius. That's fucking amazing.
As the last... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Towards the end of that song, you can see many of the Dunedain kind of joining in the humming. They don't know the words, but they know the tune. It's an old tune of the Sorrow of Dwarves. And there's a sort of choral hum that goes around the platform.
Faroth steps from the line of people looking down upon these pyres. The last note of the dirge ringing out across the water. And he surveys his people. He surveys his friends. And he takes a deep breath. He closes his eyes and he sees a darkness. The waters of the dead marshes enveloping him. It's almost like a dream as he remembers back to that night where his actions were not his own. Tempted either by greed or by some fell spirit of that place. He had walked into the depths, answering the call of the lights. And as the world around him began to fade, where there would be no shadow, where there would be nothing, there was a cry that went out. It had been both Syrian and Nar that had saved Faroth that day, as he had foolhardily gone after a glimmering weapon. The actions that would usually be more akin to Baragon than he, but regardless, it was him that it was in a lot of trouble. He then sees a tower in the middle of the forest, it reaching high upon its mountain perch. He sees the Silver King, and he sees a blazing eye erupting from a tapestry at its back. He remembers the pain, and his hand goes to a grievous wound that arcs from one shoulder to his very hip, as he had been smashed by this nightmarish foe. And again, Nar was there, and it prevented him from being taken from this world. Faroth looks around and he looks into the fire, the braces and torches that light this scene. And he sees Nar sat across from him. One of their many fireside chats when they couldn't sleep and when they weren't being pursued by foes across the very length of Middle-earth. Faroth remembers a time when Nar had shared with him something he had not shared with anyone else. Of the dream he had had. Nar had always said that he knew the end would come for him. And while the method was hidden from him, he knew there was an internal clock, a pendulum swinging, that would one day stop. And Faroth had looked upon this as pessimism, or the stubbornness of a dwarf who had decided that he had seen some prophetic image in one fretful night as they head from the enemy. He looks down and tears form in his eyes. He remembers the better nights, the better conversations that he had had with Na. On a good night when the stars were out and it wasn't as cold as it would often be, Na had been drinking. He had smuggled some dwarven ale with him that he'd kept for special occasions, and as this was a particularly nice night and spirits were high, they had all shared some. And it is then, drunkenly, Na had professed that if he'd not been a soldier, if he'd not been a warrior, chosen of the kingdoms of dwarves, he would turn his hand to smithing, evidence that they'd seen today from the gifts that Na had given them. Becoming a smith was a dream of his that sadly lay beyond that prophetic dream, his end approaching closer and closer every day. But Na had said that one day he had wanted to forge something great. Farrell's eyes turned to the collective of people that are at this ceremony, and he says, "We're here to pay homage to two of the best people, three of the best people we have ever known. Words have been spoken of Gandalf, and all here knew, respected, loved him. He had done more for Middle-earth than any of us here." Thranduil said he did not know Na, and he did not know Cirion. Cirion was a bright star, a man more concerned with knowledge and understanding than death and destruction and hatred. And that is all that met him in Fornost. And that is my burden to bear, and it always will be. And Na was where he should have been, facing the shadow head on. And he was given what he always knew he would receive: death in the line of duty against the shadow. But Na always said that he wanted to forge something great. And I swear to you all now assembled that in Na's name and in Cirion's name, together we will forge something great. We will forge a future for Middle-earth. And he looks to the pyres and he says, "I swear it." And then he bows his head and walks to the end of the line, to the pyres. And he places his blade, the Flame of the North, upon each of them. And gives whispered words that cannot be heard by the crowd. And takes his place at Baragon's side.
Cynric steps forward. And with a lingering glance on the burning pyres, turns to the Dunedain crowd and those others gathered. "I would not be here standing today. I should not be here were it not for the healing hands of Syrian of Gondor. Man who beneath his books was braver than any man I've stood beside. He who faced the Witch King and did not kneel. He kept each and every one of us alive through ordeals we had no earthly right surviving. I have taken wounds from Orcish arrow to Morgul blade, and yet I breathe. A gift from Syrian I do not take lightly. And having been to the elven halls, not only was his skill unrivaled by human hands, but he gave even the elven healers concern. And maybe there's like a smattering of cheers or some lightness to the proceedings. Together we have travelled the vastness of Middle-earth, deepest mines to tallest peak, faced foul and fearsome foe alike, slew wraith, slew troll, slew spider, orc, and Numenorian. And though the shadow weighed upon Syrian as it does us all, he never bowed or broken before any face of evil, new or old. None could shake him even to the end. From the strength of men to the strength of dwarves, I have never travelled nor fought beside the stout folk before. Let me tell you now that each of you would be in awe of their strength, not just upon the field of battle, but of their soul. There is reason I have come to consider that the dwarves live under mountains. It is only they that have the strength to move them, they the power to shape them to their will. You would be forgiven for losing count of the mortal injuries Nar had taken, so that each blow did not find his friends. Neither Morgul blade nor troll hammer could break him, though they tried with most vicious persistence. We fought our way into their lairs of the enemy, and out of their best efforts to ambush and destroy us, because they mistook a single dwarf as only that, and not the legion of warriors he truly was. Syrian and Nar both, still my dearest friends, and I will carry them with me as surely as I do every other friend, every other family the shadow has cost me. It is with their strength and their guidance I still ride, still strike at those who would do us all harm. There is a single task ahead of us, one which we wish to see towards the end. Be it us before you, or those that lay fallen, and he beckons to those burning behind him. Both Syrian and Nar wish to see all men, all dwarves, all elves of Middle-earth united in a single purpose, to rid us of the dark shackles that bind us in this misery, and see us all free. I say, here today, let us not forget their wish. We, he raises a fist, clenched to the sky, we should all see it come to pass, banish the dark, and see an age of light.
Yeah.
And as those chants echo around the canal, there is a single voice to be heard cutting through them. The tongue Rohirric, probably understood, but none but him. Nuon Thriastrum, Ligeth, Sirion on Na, Celiofa, Heliathar Holdost, Ne Skil Herpan, Seveg, Vigend, Viwiken, Ne Winnefe Tigilden, Gumashkil Hildan, Ne Godhavok, Geond Seish, Sfingan, ne se svifta mer vosted betan, belok welm hafau frion frican forth on sended, gied skulon singan gelomen, sogiend on Gondor on Elebor, that galit beyond nowhere, this dolehitne doliest, and Magar Diolost. As he begins that intonation, people watch as he has already turned to the ships before him. He intones that with every fiber of his being, and then there is a moment of silence. And he says, Gandalf, I am sorry, I could not do better. But that does not mean I will not try. And then he takes his position with the rest of them.
Beautiful. Thranduil walks along the length of the three boats, and he picks a torch, and he steps first to Syrian's pyre and sets it ablaze, and then Nar's, and then Gandalf's. With a cut of his sword, the ropes are cut, and the boats begin to flow down this canal, down through the city, and into the lake. And he says, Numena, into the west.
Faroth watches as the flames spread and lick across the boats. And he looks around at the assembled people here. He looks at his father. And he looks at his friends, all with such beautiful memorial speeches and dedications to our fallen friends. And then Faroth looks to the newcomer, and he walks to him, and he says, I spoke of forging something greater, building a better future. My friends were right. We can't do that alone. Will you forgive me?
Bord looks to you and says, there truly is nothing to forgive. And then he looks to the pyres just for a moment, as these boats are moving out of view. I imagine. Are we in like right next to the lake?
No, so the lake is like you're at the top of a tower, so the boats would kind of go down the canal gradually, eventually ending up at the lake. Okay,
great. Well, his eyes kind of follow them down, and he thinks about, and the thought, if a thought could have a taste, it would taste of ash, as the thought Mirkwood crosses his mind. He looks around him and he still sees glistening halls and beauty surrounding these pyres. But he, in the midst of all the grief and the vein of horrific terror that is the Misty Mountains, cutting like an axe through Middle-earth, a small glisten of hope as he looks to Faroth, and he puts his hand on Faroth's shoulder and he says, your name is known. And his grip tightens for a moment, lets loose, and he walks away towards a myriad of unnamed people from Rovanian.
And as he goes, like Faroth would be sure to return the shoulder clasp and a small smile, despite the grief that weighs upon him. And as he walks away, Faroth looks to both Beregond and Cynric, and doesn't say anything, but kind of gives them both a nod that you can only imagine would translate as to, well, we're here, guys. We did it. We sent them off. And he sort of shares a look with them both.
It never gets any easier. But we will have to think. Who else we will bring on this journey with us? The Witch King lingers. He plans. We must act before him.
The mention of the fight continuing, the planning. Farrell finds himself about to say something and stops. His confidence has been knocked. And it's obvious that his plan, the thing that basically got his two friends killed, this is still his fault. And he closes his mouth and he doesn't say what he was about to say, now dwelling on this.
At that moment, some large mugs of ale arrive that Board has brought, nudging at a funeral tradition from his people in just drinking to the dead. And he, in a soft mutter, says to Nar and to Syrian, and drinks, allowing the conversation to continue.
Beragond goes and drinks down the entire contents of the ale mug that's thrust into his hands, and says to Syrian and Nar, the road is a difficult one. That does not mean we shouldn't take it. We know the Witch King is there, and he has shown himself to be beyond us, well beyond our power. The plan was not a foolish one, but now that we have information of where the chief of the Nazgul is, we should avoid him. But your plan of releasing the men in Khandum to inspire the free men of the north, I think it's still a good one. But we are an old race, and we are perhaps weighed down with the expectation of the years. Cynric, you spoke well at the end of the funeral. You were spurring us on to action. What do you say?
I think, for now, at least, Fornost, we cannot go back. I feel he lingers there, gathering his strength. What allies from where I am unsure. Surely he means to attack here. Or at least truly give the death blow to the kingdoms of Arnor. I do not know distances, and I do not know the time it will take. That'll come with some planning. And he sort of lingers on the word, thinking of all the knowledge that Syrian often offered at those kind of meetings, or I don't know if we can hold Annuminas without some help. I think we may have to reach for allies. Perhaps the dwarves, perhaps the elves, perhaps both. Maybe with that force we can free your people from Gundabad. Maybe we can rid Fornost of its overlord. and see the dead swell our ranks. But I do not think in this case we may be enough. I think this is a fight of nations, not of individuals. We can do what we can. But obviously, we need to bring more to bear.
Are you suggesting then that we circle round south through the Gap of Isengard, through Rohan and down through Gondor, gather our strengths there, and maybe up to Lake Town and Nar's Kingdom of Erebor, as we planned, and leave Khan Dum until the end?
I think we need the help of the kingdoms of Arnor, but they cannot leave while in danger of this current threat. I think perhaps if we can implore those elves of Rivendell, or perhaps the dwarves of the Blue Mountains, or a myriad of men from realms less suffering.
Bord speaks up with his throat.
Do you have something to say?
Sorry, no, that was in response to you saying a myriad of men. Like men, like Bjornings from Old Karak, and he speaks up and he nods and he says, "It's a tremendous journey that you're organizing, but my people will help. We've always helped."
That is good to know. We could use all the good news we can get right now.
My actions at the moot. What I've done means that there is no firm leader here in the north. I have crippled us to inaction. If we are to leave, I would at least need to ensure that there is someone to be accountable for our actions here, someone to ensure that leadership is given.
You have said it yourself. Your father is a fine defender, and he will defend Annuminas. He will not strike out against the enemy, but he will defend Annuminas tooth and claw. And maybe that will be our best hope until we return with allies.
And what of Gundabad?
Or
Thranduil.
Gundabad. Or we go straight to Khan Dum, to Gundabad.
Thranduil appears in the conversation somehow. He does that. He just is. And he says, "And what of Gundabad? I believe the dwarves hold it dear. In their language, it is Thuraz Norkai, the place that they awoke. And there are dwarves in the Blue Mountains. And in Moria. Now, I will not risk my people to recapture a dwarven ruin. But perhaps they would."
Thranduil, you speak correctly as always. And for what little it is worth, Farah says, sort of looking inwardly for a second, for what it is worth, I gave my word that I would liberate those of our people and those of the dwarves from Gundabad.
Then let us strike out for the Blue Hills. And is it the Blue Hills over by the Grey Havens?
Blue Mountains, yeah.
Blue Mountains, and see what see what we can raise there, and then strike out for Gundabad, for Khandum.
Is this the nearest of the dwarven settlements? I'm guessing Farrell would know this, but like his mind obviously goes to both Erebor and Moria, obviously unknowing of.
Moria is closer from where you are now. Moria is definitely closer, but the Blue Mountains is quite a long journey. You've got to go like as far west as you can go in Middle Earth, basically, to get there. They're like on the very western coast. You'd have to go through sort of Linden as well to get there, which is where there's an elf kingdom there, and the Grey Havens and that kind of area.
But it's closer than Erebor
by a mile. Yeah, by Erebor, you have to go back over the mountains and.
Yeah.
Only a single mile? That doesn't sound bad.
Those are the two choices, if not both. Depends.
What of Elrond? Thranduil asks. Have you spoken with him? Will he not commit his forces to this great fight?
We have spoken with him. The last we spoke to him, we spoke of uniting the North. But he will need to be told. I dare say the fall of Gandalf word of that has already reached his ears, perhaps.
It would not surprise me.
Elrond says he does not command his elves. They wish.
How typical of Elrond to say such a thing. No, indeed, he is no king. He cannot command his elves to do something against their wishes. And you can tell that there's derision in his tone as he's speaking about Elrond. He cannot command them. He might suggest to them, but then again, he might not. He has grown very comfortable in Imladris.
Perhaps you could galvanize his will to see that Gandalf's sacrifice was not in vain. Maybe that would shake him from his comfort.
Perhaps. I have not spoken to Elrond in an age. Perhaps it's time. We have been hard at work in Mirkwood since your leaving. We have been pushing Sauron's forces back towards Dol Guldur with the help of Bord's people and the Wildermen. The recapture of Thoronthir from the King in Silver has been a great boon in this process, and we have sent missives to the men of Lake Town and of Dale, but have not heard from them. The Lady Galadriel has committed her forces to the fight as well, as of course she would, for she is wiser than all of us. But of Elrond I am not certain, and of these men here, they seem weak and disorganized.
Baragon nods and then stops himself and glances guiltily over at Faroth.
All Faroth was going to say was, it would seem that if we are to speak with Elrond and negotiate with the dwarves, perhaps to Rivendell and then to Moria.
Are there many in Moria? I
know nothing of the place.
Nor I. It was a thriving dwarven kingdom. But who knows? They're isolationist, as are all dwarves.
Is it possible that Bord might have heard some, I don't know, have some inkling of any happenings in Moria? Because I feel like Bord would be very interested in going there, but I don't know if he might have heard some things along the Anduin.
Yes, I think it's worth a go. You could roll me a lore.
Okay.
Dice roll? What is
First
this?
time
roll?
roll.
I know. Oh,
What game are we
I'd
playing?
forgotten about rolling.
Playing a game.
That is a natural 20.
Okay, then that's really good news for you guys. So Thranduil is saying, I have not heard from this kingdom in a long time. No one really has. But you have. You heard stories that it has been too quiet in Moria of late, that there has been no trade to Moria from the eastern side of the Misty Mountains, that the Wildermen have stopped trading with them. They haven't seen any caravans from Moria in years. And similarly, you would hear the same thing from like Men of Dale and Lake Town and things like that. You would have heard that no caravans have left Moria in maybe 10 years.
If it weren't for all the rumors, that would be the first place the board would recommend that they head. And it would be a lie to say that the 6'8" large brawn stacked soldier slayer of east of the Misty Mountains didn't shudder for just a moment when moving down the Anduin just east of Moria, and didn't feel some sort of semblance of relief when it was determined that their party would take a different route to get to Annuminas. Board would speak up slowly and patiently with worry and some semblance of grief is still kind of hanging on the moment. But out of the silence, he would raise his voice and say, there is something strange in Moria, or out of Moria. I would not trust those who reside in the mountain at all. Oh, I would look west. I think the Blue Mountains, as you discussed. And he retreats back.
Tidings. But perhaps it makes our decision easier. We can always speak to Olorin first or on our return.
I believe that's right. We should speak with Elrond. But thank you for your counsel, Board. I gave my word that I was going to liberate our folk and the dwarves from Gundabad. That is what we will do. Do any of you have any business here before we depart?
Beragond just sort of stretches and walks over to the window and looks out over the city, but he doesn't do anything. But he kind of looks up, and a moment later he's gone.
In that case, Faroth is going to go and speak to two people, if that's okay, Lloyd. He's
Sure.
going to go and find Laniel, and he's going to find his father. And you can tell me who he runs into first.
I'm going to flip a coin.
It doesn't have to be right now, though. I'm just saying that's what Faroth wants to do at some point.
Yeah. So if you were looking, you would bump into Laniel before your father.
So Varoth is immediately quite bashful at the sight of her. But he gives her sort of like a weary smile as he goes and stands next to her. I imagine they're sort of looking out across sort of a balcony, and from it you can see this canal that reaches down all the way to the lake, and you can still see the fire's embers lifting into the sky. And he says, I do wish it was under better circumstances that we were meeting again.
Seems unlikely that there will ever be better circumstances.
Faroth looks down and then looks at there and he says, I have to believe that there is something to hope for. Mainly because I trust my friends, and my friends see it, even if I can't.
You're young, Faroth. You have not lived to see the repetition of cycles that I have seen. But I'm sorry for the loss of your friends.
Surely there have never been times quite like these.
There have been worse times and better times.
I had hoped, as I said, that we would have met under better circumstances.
The circumstances are improved by seeing you. And there's like the tiniest hint of a smile in the corner of her lip.
And he almost returns the smile, and then he looks down and away and again, and he says, my thoughts were with you a lot on the road from Mirkwood. But since then, many things have happened and many losses have been felt. Three people I would consider to be very good friends of mine gone. And
she puts her hand on your neck and gives you a kiss on the cheek, an elven kiss on the cheek, and there's like an immediate sort of like, she says, I know. I knew Olorin a long time, and I'm sorry.
Faroth realizes that obviously she would have known him a lot more than Faroth, and he instantly realizes what he's been saying to her. Obviously, she's been feeling too. And he takes a hand and he looks into her eyes and he says, that necklace I gave you, the bone necklace, I would have you guard it for me just a little longer.
She like looks out over the landscape of Arnor and looks for a second towards the thunderclouds that roll above Fornost, and then back to you. I think I can manage that.
And Farrell smiles.
Bored. You're looking for Thranduil, and it's impossible not to find him. He's like a blazing torch in a dark room. Anytime anyone looks towards him, there's just perfection. The wind always in his hair in exactly the right way. The cape, the long cloak that he wears, always blowing in a dramatic fashion. Perfection made flesh, and you can find him easily.
When Board approaches Thranduil, it's with caution, as is usually the case. But Thranduil, I imagine, sees him coming, despite the fact that Board approaches from behind. And after he mutters some wise words, in a way that presumes that he already knows what Board came to speak of, Board just speaks as he's learned to. He says, "The blood of my people was enough. but I'm assuming that my duty here seals the alliance between my people and yours. Mirkwood shall be free of the darkness.
It shall. And your service here. They are grateful. They may not think it now, they may not feel it now, but they will come to see. They need you. They need friends. They need strength.
Bord nods, noting but not saying that the one thing they didn't need was gratitude. He speaks up and says, I never thought the end of Mithrandir would be at the banks of some old city.
No. I always thought that we would see him in the west. That he would get on the boats in the Grey Havens and come with us someday.
That catches Bord off guard, the west, because in his mind this is the west. And then he remembers and realizes his folly and his mistake.
He would note maybe the tiniest furrow of a brow to Valinor. Not this Middle Earth.
Nods.
Is where all our people will go, all my people. We are leaving.
And Bord would speak up, and the rest of us.
You will inherit this Middle Earth and be a world of men.
Inheritance. Kind of looks around and nods, and the irony is just they just bask in the moment.
This was once almost the pinnacle of what men could make this city. It was the jewel of their craft. And perhaps now, he looks around, it has fallen into disrepair. And perhaps the towers are not quite as grand as those in Valinor. Perhaps the masonry is a little bit sloppy here and there. And he's almost grinning at this stage. But it is something. Not quite the work of Gondolin. But it's something to fight for.
Something to fight for. And then Bord would take his leave.
Cynric.
Cynric would have passed by Thranduil at some point and like given him another nod, and unless Thranduil had beckoned him over, he didn't wish to intrude his purpose elsewhere. He would take a walk through the dark streets, rubble filled and covered in moss or lichen or something. The rotten core at the heart of humanity, the faded grandeur on the outside belies a ruined inside. Maybe men were weak. Maybe they are weak. Maybe he could have done more to save Gandalf, Olorin, Mithrandir. But he had wallowed in defeat for long enough. He was not about to go back there, not after what he had done, what he'd seen, and what he had overcome. He walks for a while in the quiet, working his way back up to that garden, back up to one friend he still had. He was still on this Middle Earth because of a friend now dead. And Ciara was still here because of the other. He would size up the horse helm and strap it to Ciara. He would read those words again. And then he would look to his other hand. In it Syrian's book, a gift given and unreceived. He thought about adding it to a pyre, the memory of it lost. He licks a finger and opens the cover and runs the finger over page and page of a script he did not really know. This was important enough to Noah to give to Syrian, important to both of them. It held unknown knowledge, but it certainly held known significance to him. Maybe the dwarves of the Blue Mountains will appreciate it. Maybe they won't. But for now, he would do his best to. And he sits where he sat before. The faceplate of Noah proudly upon the Silver Lady of Rohan, leading him into battle forevermore. And he just took his time to appreciate the dwarven glyphs. Perhaps he would learn what was so important to Noah that Syrian should know of it. And there is the low scratching of papery sheaves scratching against one another into the night.
Beregond, where have you gone?
Oh, Beregond was only gone a few minutes, but never mind. He just hurried up to the top of the tower of Minas Isildur, and there at the highest bit, a little shard of Syrian's horn that had broken and has has a bit of the symbol of the white tree of Minas Tirith. He goes and finds a loose crack in the stonework or in the roof tiles, and just goes and puts it underneath that. He doesn't really know why, but also because he wanted to see the view from up here, and he looks around, and then goes back down to join his companions, and they've all gone. So he goes around looking for them, waiting to.
Great. Faroth, you're kind of walking through the crowd, maybe away from Laniel, and you can see your father speaking with three other Dunedain nobles in his typical sort of grim-faced manner. And he would look for him in your direction and then turn back to talk to the other three.
Faroth ignores the disdainful look and makes his way towards his father. And as he arrives, he says, "I would speak with you in private."
I do not like to keep secrets, Faroth. It is dishonest.
I only make this request for your benefit, not mine. But as you wish. Father, the moot is still stayed, as it was pledged from all of us here, that no leader of our people will be selected until those that reside in Gundabad are free. I made a promise to liberate those within that foul place, and I will do so. Not just for them now, but for Nar, for Syrian, and for Gandalf. I will see this done. You will defend our borders well. I know it, Father, because you always have. But no, when I return, things are going to change. I promise you.
He raises an eyebrow. Uh-huh. And you said you would go to Fornost and bring back forces from there. And all you brought with you was grief. And if you return from Gundabad, then things will certainly be different. But do not expect the perception of you to magically change. You are headstrong, arrogant, foolhardy, and it has cost you the life of 2 of your friends.
And you are absent of perception, and one day, Father, it will cost you everything. And Varroth turns and walks away.
So the evening kind of continues, and there's drinking, somber singing atop this platform. And people celebrate the lives and mourn the loss of these 3 heroes of Middle-earth. And it's probably a little bit rough in the morning when you awake. I imagine you probably have had a little bit too much ale.
Can I throw in one thing?
Yep.
The beer that Beregond drank and the treatment of Fardred to Farroth has irked him. So, without really thinking this through, he decides to steal one of his family daggers or something like that from Farroth's father as a gift later to Farroth, because he thinks he'll be pleased with it.
I mean, you're an expert thief, much better than even these vigilant warriors would notice. I think you would be able to steal a dagger, no problem, particularly with Fardred in his cups, to hold as a gift for later.
Yes.
I think once the drink is flowing a bit more, Varroth would approach Cynric, and he would clap. Maybe, I know Cynric went off, but maybe like on the edges of the celebration, perhaps Cynric is sat on his own, perhaps.
Sure, you can find me wherever. That's fine.
Yeah, so he sits down and he claps him on the shoulder and hands him a drink. And he says, I think Syrian would have been very pleased to know that a king of elves, spoke at his funeral. But nah, I would have loved to have seen his face.
Yeah.
Cynric, as you come over, it closes the book that he was going through, and your particularly wily perception probably would notice a few damp spots upon the book where they caught his tears. He puts it aside and takes the drink, and then manages a laugh. Maybe a louder laugh than you expected. Maybe he's putting on a strong face. Maybe we'll all get that honor at some day.
Perhaps. And Farrell takes another drink of the ale, and he can taste the tears that have run down his face onto his lips as well, but he tries his best to ignore them. And he says, I know you once bore a different title. Before we were elf friends, you were... And it's like he doesn't even want to say it, but then he says it. The mourner. And I don't know if this needs saying or not, but I shall hazard it that this is different.
He possibly like looks up into the starry sky, hands clutched around the cup on his lap. And he comes back down to earth. It is different, but so am I. That was a mantle I carried for a long time, for my own reasons. And though maybe some would not be surprised to see me pick that mantle back up again, I think there is a lot to mourn for. But I have also seen there is a lot to fight for. I ceased being the mourner, and I shall not go back to that place. It is what Sauron wants from me, and I will do my best to keep him unsatisfied for as long as I can.
And Farrell smiles and he looks off into the distance and where they're sat, like a looming threat. The more they can still see the two towers of Fornost, and maybe even a slight rumble just on the edge of hearing. And Farrell looks back at Cynric and smiles. There is plenty to fight for.
I think there was a moment of silence, and Farah's hand, without like looking at you, comes across and grabs onto like around your wrist. And he says, "Next time I tell you not to charge the Witch King, are you going to listen?"
And Farrell just looks at him and says, "With the wind and the thunder, I'm sorry, I couldn't make out what you were saying. Next time, be sure to shout louder."
And he like his face turns and gives him like a sideways look, and you see a grin spread across his face. And he just shakes his head and gets up. "Well, we best drink some more before it's all gone."
Farrell nods and joins him.
And he sort of walks around the bench, and the hand that he gripped you with runs through the flank of Ciaro again. And maybe he the hand lifts, runs through and lifts the tail as he goes. Her tail. And they walk into the crowd.
So there is some mirth to be found. And I think that as the night goes on, you would probably see a little bit more of that natural sort of inclination for people to have a bit of a laugh and tell stories and things like that. And the next morning would dawn cold and rainy and fairly miserable, which is the traditional way that you start a journey. It has always been the case at the start of your journey that it is awful weather. And maybe that's a good omen, maybe it's a bad one, you're not too sure. But preparations are made for you to begin your journey onwards. And Thranduil would say, "An hour, wait an hour. There is another who will come. A wilder man. Not very chatty, but useful. Wait an hour."
"As you wish."
You'll know him. he'll stick out. I'm going to head back to my home. Perhaps I'll speak with Olorin along the way. I suppose it depends on what mood I am in when I near his hallowed halls. But I wish you a pleasant journey, and I wish you success. We need success. We cannot have anything less. Dwarves are stubborn and greedy, but they can be reasoned with. Gundabad is their home. It is where they were first made, where they first awoke in the first age. Remind them of that fact. Goodbye.
Farrell does the elven salute of the fist to the chest and the slight bow. And I'm guessing his eyes meets Laniel's one last time, as I'm sure she'll probably be accompanying him back home.
Yep, she's mounted up on her beautiful elven steed already. She kind of looks over her shoulder at you and graces you with a smile, full smile. And it's like the sun has come out because she is an elf and thus perfection. And the elves begin their journey away, those few. And it seems Annuminas is a little less beautiful, a little more grey when they leave. And an hour passes, and you can see a figure moving towards the gate of the city, but we'll meet him next time. So thank you for playing in this session, guys. There was a dice roll, which was fantastic. I hope you really enjoyed it. I had a great time.
I did.
Cheers.
A figure?
Bye.
That's it, huh?
That's it.
All right.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Amazing. Bye. I guess.
Okay, well, thank you for those of you who watched. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did, because I mostly watched this section. It was fucking great. And I'll see you all next time.